Welcome to the Christ Connection podcast. We are here to help and encourage you to enjoy your adventure with Jesus. I'm your host, Kevin Senapati Ratna. Let the journey begin. Hello and welcome to episode number 76 of the Christ Connection podcast. My name is Kevin Senapati Ratna, and I'm glad you could join us today. This is a good episode. I suppose that I should say they all are, and I really think we try to give you the best resource to help you in your walk with Jesus. That's what we're all about. This is one that I am excited about for you because it is a deep dive discussion. Now we have our various types. We have our errand run episodes where we try to get it in a shorter period of time to give you some resources to help you on your way and the amount of time you could run an errand. All right, we have our prayer episodes, just some time to spend in the presence of God, enjoy His company, and we do that together. And then we have our 10-minute tool time episodes, which we're experimenting with, just kind of a 10-minute thought title, some sort of tactic to help you on your walk with Jesus. And then the deep dives. And the deep dives are designed to go a little bit deeper on one subject or one topic or one book to help you, just kind of give you some meat and potatoes kind of stuff to help you grow with Jesus. And this is one of those episodes. Well, I'm going to get to the bio in a second of Gary Thomas, but this is about building a relationship with God that is enjoyable and finding a way to enjoy Him more. When you hear Sacred Pathways, you hear the title, you don't be thrown off by that. This is a solid Bible. This is not into wacko land. This is just a good way of thinking about framing your walk with Jesus, as we talk about later, kind of a buffet table of the ways to enjoy God. And so I think you're really going to like this as we dive deep in the topic of spiritual pathways. So without further ado, my conversation with Gary Thomas. My guest today is Gary Thomas. Gary Thomas is writer in resident at Second Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, and an adjunct faculty member teaching on spiritual formation at Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon, and Houston Theological Seminary in Houston, Texas. He is the author of 19 books, including When to Walk Away, Sacred Marriage, Cherish, Sacred Parenting, and the Gold Medallion award-winning Authentic Faith. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
It is good to have an opportunity to talk about sacred pathways today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. But first, before we get to that, with your bio there, writer in residence. What exactly is writer in residence, and how do I get that gig? No, I mean, what is it?
That's the question to ask, Kevin. I don't know. There may be two of us, for all I know, or I may be the only one. It's been a great fit. I was speaking, self-employed for 15 years, writing books, traveling around, speaking at churches, and then here in Houston, Texas. They'd asked me to speak at a marriage conference. It's a very large church. And when they do a marriage conference, they have several different speakers at the same time. And after that conference, they just said, we're looking to add to our teaching team. Do you have any interest in coming down here and joining the teaching team? So it's perfect for me. I serve on the teaching team. I don't have administrative responsibilities, have great support, just being able to write, but be a part of the church. It's been a wonderful decade that I'm so grateful for. They spoil me. I'll be honest. It is. It's a good gig.
But then you travel. You travel to Portland to teach there, or?
Yeah. Well, and I haven't been more recently doing much. But when I would go in, I'd often do like week-long intensives, okay, which are tough. The 8 to 5 Monday through Thursday or Friday kind of thing. We've just been talking about how we would get together again, and mostly now it's online and Zoom, which actually makes it easier, but we'll see going forward.
So we're calling these deep dive conversations where we try to go deep on one particular topic. In this case, we want to talk about your book, Sacred Pathways. Now, for someone who is not familiar with, now we're going to go, deep with this, but for someone who's not familiar with the book, maybe you meet them somewhere, how do you describe the book?
Yeah. Well, the subtitle is 9 Ways to Connect with God. And that's really what it is. What I'm trying to do is lift people out of the stereotypical quiet time, uh, sort of a one-size-fits-all spirituality about the way to organize your devotional time to meet with the Lord. In fact, the word quiet time qualifies it in a way that isn't a good fit for probably half the Christians, frankly. And instead look at 9 different pathways or temperaments, windows through which people see God most clearly, according to the way that God made them. It recognizes that God doesn't use cookie cutters when he creates people. We have different styles, different methods of relating to God. And so it's intended to set people free, to pursue God according to the way he made them, and also to create understanding among Christians so that they get what's going on in their small group. Otherwise, Kevin, you get this, after this, what I found is that somebody says, oh, that's why they want to have 50 minutes of singing and a 5-minute short devotional. He wants 55 minutes of Bible study with, he'll put up with one song. They want us just to pray the whole time. They want us just to go out and work at a food bank. They don't realize that all of them connect with God in a different way. And when they understand the different pathways, there's just this huge, oh, okay, now I get it.
So this book originally came out in 1996, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So why the updated and expanded version? What was the thought process there?
Well, there's been a lot of renewed interest in the Enneagram. And I didn't consult the Enneagram when I first wrote the book. The Enneagram is ancient, but as far as evangelicals, it really wasn't being written on until the early 90s, right when I was doing this book. So I had heard of it, wasn't familiar with it. It's a happy coincidence that there's 9 pathways and 9 points on the Enneagram scale. There's not a direct connection at all, I don't believe. I think it's looking at 2 very different things. The Enneagram looks at uh, understanding ourselves. The sacred pathways are all about how we best connect with God. It's 2 very different things. I think the other thing is that Enneagram is sort of solidified. You are who you are. You're your number, and then the shadow, or I forget what they call it. But with pathways, I think we're often more blends. It tends to be more fluid. It's just helping people delight, adore, celebrate, connect with, meet with God. But my publisher, just recognizing this, said, hey, the book has been it's been a steady seller for over 2 decades. A lot of people have interest in the Enneagram. We just add on something at the end, update it a little bit, then add on something on the end. How do these connect together? And so that's what we did.
Is it, as an author of 19 books, is it one of those things when you one of those that have been around for a long time, then you bring it back to life, it's like starting all over again? Or
Well, I was just pleased at how well it's held up. It really is kind of a timeless book. Now, when you update a book, there are things that you have to upgrade. Think back to 96. I mentioned General Schwarzkopf. You're probably too young, Kevin, to know who he was.
I do.
Oh, okay. Well, good for you. But a lot of people, I think, if they're under 50, he's probably not the household name he was when I wrote the book. I mentioned cassette tapes as a way to get information, and nobody I know now is using cassette. So it's just amazing how quickly our culture moves on. But the core issues, what the pathways are, the relevance, it was so gratifying to see how well they've stood up. I mean, a lot of people have taught out of this. Andy Stanley did a series on it. Rick Warren made a chapter in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, focus on the pathways. John Ortberg has mentioned them. A lot of others have used them in their books, and it's been very gratifying to see that they've held up and haven't really seen anybody saying, well, we missed this or we need that or whatnot. So I just thankful to see it and really excited that God might be giving this new life. Like, again, it's never been a bestseller in any one given year, but it's just through the years found its way into the church and in the language of what it means to pursue God earnestly with passion and desire and intention.
When I encountered it, I'm guessing it was probably over a decade ago, and so that when I saw this was kind of coming back, I was like, I loved it back then. It's been so fun to re-go through it and engage with the content again. And it so fits with the idea of enjoying God and enjoying your journey with him, which resonates with my heart. So it's been a fun process. Kind of getting into the content there. Well, first, what is your dream when someone picks this up? The average Christian. I mean, you kind of touched on this, but a little. Anything else as far as what's your dream that when they're done reading that book that they're taking away? Is there kind of this
Yes, yeah.
heartbeat there?
Yeah, absolutely. My dream is that when somebody has gone through the book, prayerfully considered it, and begun to put it into practice, that their devotional time with God would be the highlight of their day. It would be something they do not out of obligation, but out of delight. And if they miss it, if life events just conspire to where it's just not possible, they can't wait to get back to it the next day. Look, Kevin, I'm all for discipline. And when I was a young Christian in a Chi Alpha group back in college, I stressed discipline above all else. And it's not that discipline isn't important. What I didn't understand back then is the power of delight. That if you create something that you delight to do, discipline often takes care of itself. And so, while I think every Christian needs some element of self-discipline and meeting with the Lord, if we can make that time enjoyable, we're going to be far more likely to do it more often. And I think there's nothing more fundamental than spending time with God and honoring him by delighting it when we do. And so that's just what I'm hoping to see happen.
So when people engage with the pathways and they take the assessments and they see where they're at on there, what's the difference between the calling that all of us have to each point along that versus just engaging in the things that you have the higher score in? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. For instance, let's use the caregivers. We haven't talked about the individual pathways. I'll just give one. Caregivers are Christians who feel like they connect best with God when they're caring for others in God's name. It might not just be sick people. It might be fixing a widow's car. It might be an EMT who just is one of those guys that likes to rescue others or whatnot. But for them, that's when they feel closest to God, not sitting alone, not singing, not with an instrument in their hand, but actually offering practical care. Well, anybody could see. James 1 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: look after the orphan and widow in their distress. So every Christian is called to care. Jesus' whole parable on the sheep and the goats, whether prisoners, the poor, the naked, the lonely, all of that. Here's the difference. For a caregiver, it's what fills them up. For a lot of us, caregiving is a duty, it's an obligation. We do it because God has loved us, we want to love others, but we have to go recover from it. For a caregiver, it fills their gas tank, it doesn't deplete their gas tank. An example I would use is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She had the famous ministry to leprosy victims. And when young women would want to join her order, she would ask them very clearly, does this work give you joy? And if there wasn't an immediate yes, they didn't get in. She wasn't looking for martyrs. She didn't want people who gave care as an aspect of, this is what I'm supposed to do, therefore I'm doing it. It's more, this is what fills me up. The same thing we could talk about the intellectual. It doesn't mean you're smart. It's a conceptual idea that you connect best with God when you understand new things about God. That for your heart to open up, your mind has to open up. You understand things about God's grace, just who he is, his nature. It makes you adore God more. Well, all of us should be filling our minds with the scriptures, and we all need to do it. But for the intellectual, it is their preferred way to feel closest to God. It's not something they just do to feed them. I mean, it's their delight. It's what leads them to worship. For them, it is very much an aspect of worship. So most of these pathways, there's some not necessarily, we all should be involved with in some way, but it's helpful to know this is what really feeds me spiritually. I'm not doing it because I'm supposed to be doing it. I'm doing it because it's my delight and it helps me to connect with God like nothing else.
So would you encourage someone to then you find your top 2 or 3 and then make that the bulk of your time with God, and then the rest of them should do as needed, or
Yeah. Well, it's what I want is for people to have an individual spiritual prescription. And by that, I mean, when you're really feeling lonely or depleted, you need to hear from God. You need to be strengthened in God. You need to know these are the things that I know will really help me connect with God. Like that they refresh my soul. They lead me in to God's presence. But a full Christian experience, what I use is Jesus' famous words: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Any true Christian devotion has all 4 elements. So by heart, I mean adoration and worship. Even if you're an intellectual who wants to study, a caregiver who wants to give care to others, at adoring God, worshiping God needs to be a part of your life for you to be a healthy Christian. Soul refers to prayer. Again, the intellectual might prefer study more than direct interaction with praying to God. But an intellectual needs to pray to God just as the contemplative finds that as their preferred pathway to spend a lot of time in more uh, quieter forms of prayer. So we all need to pray. Now, the naturalist who connects with God out of doors might pray better taking a walk through a woods, sitting by a river. The ascetic, sort of like a monk or nun, may pray better by themselves in the room. An enthusiast might pray better with a large gathering, and they're feeding off others' prayers, and then they're adding their own prayers. But all of us need to pray in some way. Heart, soul, and then mind. We all need scripture in our life. Again, for the intellectual, that he or she loves that, and they might do their Bible study alone. They might have concordances and commentaries and all of that. Others may prefer to do Bible study in a class setting, where there's a teacher and they're going through a workbook and talking about others. Others may listen to the Bible on their iPhones as they're commuting to work or as they're cleaning the house or something like that. But they recognize, I've got to find a way to get the word into my mind today. That's inviolate. How they do it is going to change. And then strength. We all need to serve the Lord. Caregivers and activists who we haven't mentioned, they are key on serving God. That's their focus. The intellectual and the contemplative and the ascetic who kind of like to be alone also need to serve God. Now, they may serve God in a different way, and it may deplete them, Kevin. They may feel like they have to come back and study and spend more time in prayer to be able to get filled up again after serving, whereas for the activists and the caregivers, serving is that's what makes them feel alive. But everybody needs to serve God. So those 4 things: heart, soul, mind, and strength. When all 4 elements are present, I think that's when you have a mature, thriving Christian who, for lack of a better phrase, is firing on all cylinders.
So someone who's read the book in 1996 and took the assessment, because now you've had some time to see how people have interacted with it over time. Do you find that the temperaments can change for people?
Yes.
Or is they and how do people engage with that thought process? Is it just see what is working and kind of weave your way along, or what?
Yeah.
How does that change?
Well, one of the things I love about Sacred Pathways, it seems funny saying that about your own book, but
I get
one
it.
of the things I loved about writing it, there's some books I've written that really are a lot of shoulds. As Christians, we should be doing this. We should be doing this. And there's a place for that in the Christian life, right? We should be sharing our faith. We should be giving all of those things. But what I love about the pathways is instead of shoulds, they're get-tos, they're invitations. There's not necessarily, you shouldn't necessarily be a contemplative instead of an ascetic, or a sensate instead of an enthusiast. Those are things that God made you that way, and you can just express who you are. Because of that, there's tremendous freedom, I think, to take a step back and say, I delight in this. I want to focus on this, but it doesn't have to be the only thing I am. I put it this way: you might prefer Mexican food. That might be your favorite food. But every now and then you'll go to a Thai restaurant. You might get bored having And I think if you know all the pathways, you might say, you know what, 4 out of 7 days, I'm going to be doing things like a contemplative. but I need to get out there once a week and be an activist, or I need to be out there once a week and really focus on um, the sensate, or bringing that in. And so there's this tremendous freedom to say, oh, I can be who God created me to be, enjoy that, respect him as my creator who made us that way, but without that heavy guilt. Again, I'm really trying to free people up and work off the power of delight to help them in their relationship with God.
Yeah, delight yourself in the Lord. That really just kind of seems the heart of what the whole book is about, is finding that way that you'll delight in the Lord. Have you found, even for yourself, I mean, if 25 years of teaching something, do you know your own strengths, but do you kind of meander through the different
Absolutely.
types?
Yeah. I think, when I wrote the book, I think I probably would have scored highest on the naturalist. I was in Northern Virginia, and one of my best ways of connecting with God was to go out into some of the battlefields, which still amazed me. I could hike for an hour and a half and not see anyone.
Wow.
And I love Virginia forests. I really do. Just the smell, the sight, and everything. And I just loved it. It was a great time to pray during some stressful seasons. When I moved to Houston, Texas, which my wife calls Cement City, that is flat. It's the joke is, if your dog runs away, you can watch him for 3 days. It was really hard for me to do that, and I think I had more of the intellectual bent, which I think I was a mix of the two. Because when I'm traveling and you're on a plane, it's really great when you can open up some books and scripture and just really connect with God without inside a metal tube called an airplane. But then I noticed, we were just visiting my son recently in Connecticut during the fall, and going out into the woods, I thought, oh, I really miss this. And so I think, if I were to go back to the Northwest or Virginia, or certainly up in New England in the fall, I could see myself gravitating back toward that element of being a naturalist. So part of it is your station in life. If you've got small kids at home, if you're working 12-hour days and commuting, if you are moved to another country or something, I mean, your life situation can really keep you from doing what might be your most preferred pathway, walking your most preferred pathway. But that's okay. They're 9. You can understand others, and maybe on the weekends you can get out in a way that you can't during the week.
Well, I definitely fall in the naturalist camp. I can to get out in nature is always good for me. Just especially in Minnesota, if you can get outside at all. And it's November in Minnesota, and it's supposed to, when we're recording this, and it's supposed to be 70 today, and there is no way I'm not going outside at some point.
Because a month from now it'll be 30, right? For the next 3 months.
Oh, we already had snow. We had
Oh,
it,
really? Okay.
And it came and left, so I'm cherishing today. But now you're the guy who's probably even more known for sacred marriage. That's kind of your...
Yes.
How do the temperaments... I'd kind of like to look at some of the ways that intersects with different areas of our life. So marriage is an example. How do we engage in the temperaments as a married couple? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's funny. After Sacred Pathways came out, there was a well-known marriage speaker who would actually do a session on Sacred Pathways, because he just thought it was wonderful to help couples understand each other and to connect and to build spiritual intimacy. And I thought it was funny because I'd written the book and I didn't have room for it in my own marriage seminars. But here's what I found, Kevin. How long have you been married?
Next year's 25 years.
Wow. So you're down the road a bit too. The more I receive from God, the better husband I am by far. When I feel loved by God, affirmed by God, encouraged by God, sometimes convicted by God, my marriage changes dramatically. God is the most important source of inspiration, empowerment, conviction, and encouragement in, I think, any marriage. He should be, anyway. And so if you can release your spouse to spend that time with the Lord in a way they delight in him, you're ultimately serving yourself. Because if they're not making you the priority that you should be, God will convict them when they meet with God, or for them to have patience for you, or just to have the delight so they're not dragging you down or draining you because they're asking you to be God to them. And so sometimes I'll say to spouses, I get the ideal that we will pray together and have our quiet times together every day. I'm going to be honest, Lisa and I haven't done that. We pray together times, yes, but our main quiet times aren't done together. I'll just say, for instance, somebody's married to an ascetic. That's like the monk or nun type that really likes to get away and be alone. They just connect with God better when there's not any distractions. And so I say to the spouse, look, don't take it personally if they need their alone time, even on vacation. It's just who they are. It's not a statement that they don't delight in you. I go, if you'll let them have that for 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, you can have a much better day the rest of your vacation or the rest of your work day or whatnot. Just let them connect with God. Be the block with the kids or whatever the distractions might be. It really does matter that you help your spouse connect with God. So I think that understanding, what can I do to help you with that? And so a wife might not resent it if the husband says, I just need to go take a walk in the woods. I might have to drive 10 miles to get there. Or the husband shouldn't resent it when he gets home when the wife says, I just need quiet. I need to go away. I need you to take care of the kids so I can just go upstairs, close all the doors, and pretend I'm by myself. I just think it's helpful when you understand that. You can learn from each other. You can appreciate each other and recognize that the best gift we can give our spouse is time to connect with God. But I would flip that around. It's also the best gift we can give ourselves. I want to be married to a woman who's connecting with God on a regular basis.
Well, that's so good, because you're allowing their encounter with God to be a nourishment to you through their, just because they're spending time with God, they're enjoying.
Absolutely.
Now, near the end of the book, you talk about how some kids struggle because their parents' pathways are different than theirs.
Yes.
Now, I have a 13-year-old daughter. Do you recommend, or how do you recommend helping your kids process finding that journey?
Yeah. When our kids were younger and I wanted them to connect with God, it was very helpful to realize they might just do it differently than I do. And I remember being on a trip. We were actually out of the country with my son. I was just asking about how he best connects with God. And I'm just going through the 9 pathways thinking, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Whatnot. And here's how we have to recognize that our kids are so different. I remember walking through the mall one time with my kids when they were younger, and we came up on one of those arcades, the flashing lights and the buzzes and my son's face lit up. And he said, man, can I have some quarters? I mean, he wanted to spend an hour in there. My oldest daughter, who has sensory issues, was like, get me out of here. I'm going to go crazy. I can't get away fast enough. Just recognizing in their entertainment, one son said, I want to spend a lot of time here. And one child saying, I can't get out of here fast enough. Well, that same daughter, later a week or so, we were taking a walk through the woods. We came up by this waterfall. There's this bench under the tree. She just stopped and goes, wow, Dad, wouldn't this be a great place to have a quiet time? She wanted it quiet. She wanted it outdoors and all that. And so it's just recognizing that rather than just telling your kids, okay, here's what it means to have a quiet time. You pray this way. You have it at this time of the day. You do it in this room. If it doesn't fit who they are and they don't get any joy out of it, it becomes like a chore. It becomes like doing the dishes, and the idea is to recognize that what really helps one connect with God may not be as good for the other. But this is key, Kevin. I don't want any child to think, because this pathway doesn't fit me, I don't need to connect with God every day. That's the danger of the one-size-fits-all spirituality. The notion that if there's one hat that everybody has to wear, well, if the hat doesn't fit you, say, I'm not into hats. And I fear that some kids say, I must not be that into God, because the way that everybody says you're supposed to connect with God, I don't get anything out of it. So they don't just think I'm following the wrong pathway. They think, I guess I'm just not one of those who are that into God or need to meet with God. That's what I think is the tragic result of a one-size-fits-all spirituality.
Do you think as a parent that you need to kind of guard your own expression at some point then? I mean, like, if, say, my wife, this is not true, but if, say, my wife and I were both naturalist and intellectuals, and so we're all about the books and I mean that kind of thing, that you might want to, dare I say, tone it down so that and then try and embrace some of the other around your children, or is it just just by exposing them to different types?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I would say do the latter with enthusiasm. Never tone yours down, because the best gift we can give our kids is passion for God, delight in God. They'll see it light up our faces. I want my kids to remember there's a wistfulness in my voice when I talk about connecting with God that supersedes watching a favorite football team, reading a favorite novel, watching a movie, or anything like that. So I would say don't tamp down yours. Get excited about God. That's the best way to get your child excited about God. But then try to learn from them. Say, oh, you like to connect with God. Tell me what that means. Tell me how did it go today? What did you do? What can you teach me? And I think we all know this, that when you teach something, you master it much better. And if your kids could say, well, I really like to connect with God this way because here's what I do and here's where it meets, then it just becomes a thing of delight, and your kids kind of own it. And it's not you trying to hold them accountable. It's them, I get to do it this way, and I can even teach my mom and dad something. And I think that's something special.
No, I think the allowing people to find their own path. We've all been around, or you and I have been around church enough that the people who've grown up in these rules and regulations, that they eventually decide, I'm going to go do something else because it's not fitting for them. Kind of staying on that theme of community, you referenced that people may struggle because they're born in a church that doesn't have much of their temperament. How would you encourage churches to help people on their journey that may not be in my my tribe, we don't have incense and
right.
I mean that kind of thing.
Sure.
So that's not going to. So how would you encourage, whether it's church leadership or in a small group setting, so that people can who are not a part, are from a different kind of temperament, would be able to fit and find their place without having to go to another denomination?
Yeah. I've always seen the sacred pathways as the Monday through Saturday expression of our faith. So that Sunday we're pooling a week's long experience of delighting and meeting with God. Now, churches have kind of wrecked that when they have a lot of Saturday evening services. So let's say Monday through noon Saturday form. The idea is that you realize no church can have all 9 pathways in a 75-minute service, even a 90-minute service. They're not going to get all of them in if they have a substantial sermon at all. So what that means is that you're not so desperate going to church. I do think it's really helpful for worship leaders to be aware of different ways that people connect with God, because when they don't, because most of them have really connected with God by singing and having an instrument in their hands, and that's great for the, maybe 10%, 15, 20% of the people in the congregation that are that way, but they're missing many other tools. They're covering up many other windows through which people could see God more clearly and have a more powerful experience. After I spoke on this at a pastor's conference, there was a pastor of one of the nation's largest churches, and this is 20 years ago. And I was shocked because he asked me to come and present this at his church, and then on the spot offered me a position to be a worship leader at the church. Now, I'm not musical at all. He wanted to make a statement hiring a non-musical guy to lead their worship team, because he saw that connecting worship with music as synonyms really was a weakness of the church. And I do think that's there. It's a great way to connect with God. But when we think of it as the only way to connect with God, I don't think we're creating the varied kind of worship experiences that will have the biggest impact. We really are cutting some people off. And I think that's unfortunate. So I would say worship leaders and pastors, be aware of what the pathways are. Try to incorporate them different weeks, different focuses. You're not going to get all 9 in one particular service, but recognize there are more ways to worship God than to sing songs and then sit and listen to a sermon.
Have you seen any churches or ministries incorporate this in through their whole life? The kind of life of the church?
One of the most moving experiences of my life, my son was a young, he might not have even been a teenager, or he was close to being a teenager. I was invited to go out to South Africa, Johannesburg, and there's a very large church there. They met in an auditorium, but they created a chapel. They loved Sacred Pathways. That's why they brought me out. And they created a chapel that had sections of the chapel designed according to the pathways. So that this is the emphasis if you're a naturalist, if you're an ascetic, if you're a sensate, all of that. And it was there for people to come in during the week, because their large services were still in sort of an auditorium, just like you'd think an auditorium would look. But they wanted to recognize that people could come during the week to the chapel and have an entirely different personal experience with God. That was beyond moving. It was the day before cell phones. So when I took the pictures of the camera, I don't know where they are. Younger don't realize how phenomenal it is that we always have a phone with this. I so wish I would have kept those, because it really was one of the more moving times for me, just to see a church flesh out a book in front of me. I guess it's the equivalent of a novelist seeing their book made into a movie.
Was it so like there were 9 little stations around the room that each person could go to? So if there was, like, the naturalist, there was a window, or was it?
Yeah, it's been a couple decades. I don't remember completely, but yeah, it was. And I went through the chapel and went around it, and they had a focus. It was a time in South Africa's history when, and they explained, labor was ridiculously cheap. I mean, they could hire laborers for $1 a day. And so it was, being able to build something like that might have just been an historical anomaly where they could just, as a church, say, okay, we want to make this happen.
So going back to the idea that this has been out for 25 years, what has been one of the things that people have most misunderstood about them? If you get feedback or something that you're like, I always want to set this, this straight or whatever. Is there something that when people pick it up, they tend to go a certain way that you'd like to say?
Yeah. I think the 2 things is that there are some people who think their pathway is the only way. They so meet with God. They meet with God so powerfully. They are not content to be a contemplative. They think everybody should be a contemplative. We all should spend 2 hours in silent prayer adoring God. The intellectuals that think every small group meeting should be 95% just straight out Bible study. The people think, no, actually, we shouldn't be meeting in homes. We should be in a soup kitchen. We should be picketing that evil, the activists. We should just gather to pray and then go out and actually really do what matters. And so I think there's this thinking, and I get it. I think in the best way, it comes from, I really connect with God. I just want to go out and do it. I think you'll connect with God if you do it too. Hopefully they're just sort of a cheerleader for that. The other only negative I've seen through the years is that because I describe very many different practices, for instance, with the contemplative, I talk about the Jesus prayer, which was a big part of Eastern Orthodox spirituality. It's using a prayer as an anchor to stay in the presence of God. The most common form is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. It's often considered the perfect prayer. It's got the right address, Lord Jesus Christ, recognizing Son of God, what we need, have mercy on me, and then who we are, a sinner. And you'd say it over and over just to anchor themselves in the presence of God. Well, I've had some groups that would say, oh, that's like TM, transcendental meditation, or mantra speaking. And I'm like, the Eastern Orthodox Church was using this thousands of years before California was a state, and anybody would talk about TM. And though they might think that TM tried to corrupt it or whatnot, I don't think that corrupts this practice that has been used for over 1,000 years in our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters. And so some did attack me when the book came out. And I stressed to them, none of this, I'm not saying anybody should pray the Jesus prayer, or centering prayer was another controversial thing. I'm saying this is what some Christians have found have really connected them with God. If it freaks you out, if it bugs you, if it bothers your conscience, don't do it. Now, I mean, certain things I would absolutely forbid: consulting a medium. There's spiritual things that the Bible is just so clear don't have anything to do with that. But there is a lot of freedom. I try to tell people, while the Old Testament worship had very elaborate rituals, intricate, you sprinkle a little blood of this, you wring that neck, you put this here, this goes on this side, on this day of the week you offer this, then in the evening you offer that, and then you bring in the censers and all. I mean, it's just so explicit. In the New Testament, when it comes to personal private devotion, there's nothing. I mean, there are a few guidelines for corporate worship about keeping order. You got, all the things that Paul says in 1 Corinthians and whatnot. But when it comes to how you spend time with God on your own, it's shocking when you think about it. We don't. And so if there was one right way, I think God in his inspired scriptures would have given us that one right way. And so I'm trying to speak of freedom without making somebody feel guilty for doing something or not doing something. That bothers some people. They think there's one particular way you meet with God, and if anybody says anything different, then you become the heretic.
Well, I don't think you're a heretic. I liked it. So
thank you.
Yeah. If that means anything to anyone, that doesn't matter. But anyways, I think the book really is like that buffet table of encounter with God.
That's a great example. I love that analogy.
Because you're allowing people to find, and if you had orange Jello every day, and that's all you ate, you probably get unhealthy. But if you like a certain thing at the table a little bit more than others, then go for it and allow that.
I love that. If you don't want the kale, don't eat the kale. Now my wife will go to the kale first, but and some people know I probably should try to have some kale, but it doesn't mean you have to. And I think, to be honest, the intellectual probably do better to learn from the contemplative and pray more often. Just as the ascetic, who tends to have a more serious, sober-minded faith, could do well to learn from the enthusiast. Hey, there's a time to celebrate. There's a time to remember the supernatural mystery of God. The traditionalist that goes by ritual and symbol needs to realize that God still moves supernaturally. And so he needs, or she needs, the enthusiasts who are saying, man, I hope God moves in a powerful way today like he's never moved before. They need to take spiritual risks. They need to see God active today. We all can learn from the other temperaments. And so I like that buffet. You don't have to have it every day, but every now and then, take a different dish and see how it tastes.
Well, it's probably true that you get that certain, when you're fed a certain way, when you try something else, it probably has a more impactful, if you're, I'm not a, if I was going to make the list, probably the lowest would be caregiver. So my mercy is probably, in the tank. But at the same point, it's important. I mean, when those moments come, it is enriching as well. I mean, I just have to go back and go to the woods or something afterwards.
You know what I've found that's been kind of fun and interesting? When people come through a charismatic or Pentecostal church, as they get to be older and adults, they often gravitate toward liturgical traditions because it's just new and fresh. On the other hand, I've heard a lot of people that have come from liturgical traditions and they get into a charismatic church. It's like, wow, I mean, now it's alive. This is real. And so I think some of that is just breaking out of the rut, and the routine can be good. So yeah, I think you see that, and then you might want to end up going back to what fed you when you were young as well. But it's helping people understand that God's church is richer for having both.
Right.
For instance, the traditionalist remembers what was. They use forms of faith, prayer and whatnot, prayers that might have been prayed 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Often will follow the Christian calendar. So they celebrate Advent and Lent and Pentecost. And so their life is sort of pinned to traditional religious expression. And the church needs to remember that. That's a healthy thing. But then enthusiasts are almost the opposite. They're like, what is God doing now? I want to see God move in a supernatural way. I want to pray that things get so chaotic we don't even get to the offering. While the traditionalists saying, oh, all's well with the world. It's 10:24. Offering is passed. Everything's in time. But it's healthy for the church to have both.
Right.
And I think the same way, because God moved historically and he moves today supernaturally. Another thing that might seem like opposites, but they work together, would be the activist and the caregiver. Activists feel most alive to God when they're fighting God's battles. It might be an evangelistic crusade. It might be picketing an injustice. It might be standing up against evil or for God's glory, whatever it is. And then you have the caregivers who are taking care of others in Jesus' name. So it might seem like they're opposite, but what I say is the activist is addressing systemic evil. They want the evil to stop. The caregivers are taking care of the victims of evil. They're working with individuals. They want to say, you know what, evil hasn't stopped. I've got to take care of this person. And help them see the church is richer for having both. I don't want the caregiver to feel like they have to be an activist, because eventually I hope somebody will stop the source of the evil. On the other hand, I don't want the activist to try to become a caregiver, because it works the same way. You need to take care of the victims while you're also taking care of the systemic problem. And so it's recognizing that God is so wonderful and great and such a brilliant creator. He's not like a football coach who has to draft whoever's available, right? We kind of need a quarterback. Don't got a quarterback available. We'll just do the best we can. God gets to create his team. He designs us. He says, my church needs activists. It needs caregivers. It needs traditionalists. It needs enthusiasts and ascetics and all along the way. And it's just exciting to see the wonder of God revealed in his church at large, that not one person can capture on their own what individual devotion to God means. I do think you see all 9 pathways in Jesus. I think you see 4 or 5 in David, and at least 2 or 3 in Moses. So I do think the more mature you are, probably more pathways you're open to. But looking at the church as a whole, it's exciting to me just to see the wonder of God displayed in diverse forms of connecting with him.
No, I was actually thinking about that you had mentioned in the book about Jesus encompassing all of them. And it really is the beauty of the church that, now the Spirit is given to all of us, and he's divvied it out, and we get to express Jesus in the way that we were designed, and through the temperament that we have. Our time is coming to an end. If people were wanting to learn more about this book, I know there's GaryThomas.com, correct?
Yes.
Any other final ask that you would have of the audience before we wrap up?
Just I would say, well, my website, GaryThomas.com, does have where you can look at some excerpts from it and read up on it what you want. The book is called Sacred Pathways, so you could look at it on Christian book distributors or Amazon or whatnot. We've also just filmed, which I'm pretty excited about, a DVD curriculum.
Wow.
You can also download it. So there are 5 different sessions where we introduce it, and then 3 sessions where we talk about 3 of the pathways, and then 1 where we tie it all together. It's a great thing for small groups to go through to understand each other, for a family to go through to understand each other. There have been a number of churches that have done series on this. If a pastor's looking for a church series, you've got 9 sermons right there. You focus on each pathway. Just recognize it. And so I just want to offer it as a gift to the church, because here's what excites me. I mentioned going to South Africa. It was one of my first experiences in cross-cultural traveling. And the challenge, I don't know if you've done a lot of that, is that a lot of things are so different. Humor is really difficult because so much humor is based on wordplay and puns, which when you're talking to a place that's got to be translated, or English isn't their first language, it doesn't work. And using historical examples, even George Washington, they don't know George Washington, they know Nelson Mandela, right? And then referring to football, for them that's soccer, it's not the Dallas Cowboys. So it was a challenge of saying, okay, how do I communicate this using the stories I usually use in a way that's meaningful to them? And I'll never forget, on the plane on the way back, I wasn't sure how well I'd succeeded. I mean, the church was very encouraging, said, we want to bring you back. Thank you. It was great. But I just sensed the Lord telling me, Gary, I know your heart, that you gave yourself to help them connect with me. And there's no better gift you can give to me than to help others love me.
Wow.
And I just want to say to those listening, that's what I hope this book will do, not only to help you love God, but to give you a tool to help others learn how to love God. I don't know if there's a better gift we can give God than helping people express their devotion to Him.
Wow, that's such a good truth, and something. Thank you for releasing this book and now re-releasing in a new and updated form. It's a blessing to the body of Christ. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and you got some takeaways. Maybe you need to listen a couple times just to get all the things that, again, it's a meat and potatoes kind of an episode. We want those to be a little deeper. So you got to think about it, maybe meditate on it. What is God saying to you? Grab the book, and you can find all the resources at christconnection.cc/podcast and click on the episode. We'll have where you can find the book and things like that. Go through the book, kind of find your own pathways that will work best for you, and then think about your family, think about your social circle. Who are those people that maybe they're struggling with where they're at with their pathways? And so again, christconnection.cc/podcast. Click on the episode link, and you'll find resources to find out. Go to Gary's website, things like that. But before you go, would you take a moment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future episodes? Take a moment to share this with a friend who might be kind of feeling stuck and they're kind of boring and it's gotten routine, their walk with Jesus, and give them some ideas to spark them along the way. And reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. We are at Enjoying Prayer on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, that's Enjoying Prayer, which, if you're wondering what that is, that's the name of my first book, and so that's how we got the handle. So Enjoying Prayer at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I hope to hear from you there. And until next time, thanks for listening.